Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Andy, Matt, how are you guys doing this afternoon?
Great. No complaints.
Good. I appreciate you guys joining me here on the podcast. We got connected. Well, Andy, you and I have run into each other at conferences and actually just ran into each other last week at KMNI. But your article on Bloomberg Law about, I think it was titled, "Don't Worry If AI is Good Enough Yet." And you guys talked about build versus buy, which I beat that drum quite a bit here on the podcast. And we used to be, AcroWire used to be, the predecessor company in InfoDash was AcroWire. We were a custom dev shop. So we used to help law firms do custom dev all the time. And you referenced that, bringing in external partners in your article. So I knew we had to chat. But I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves. Andy, you're the Chief Innovation Officer at Katten, correct? Tell us a little bit about what you do and where you do it.
Sure. I've been at Katten for a very long time, but up until in the last 6 or 7 years in this innovation role. Before that, I was the firm's executive director, which is sort of the deputy chief operating officer. And while doing that, in my tenure, I started integrating technology with the practices a little bit, and we reorganized, and they said, this is something that we're going to have to get our arms around, and shifted me into sort of take care of that. And so I built a team, and granted, we have a small team on purpose, but I built an innovation team around practice innovation, leaning, sort of starting to get into operational innovation a little bit now too, as things get a little more exciting in the space. But yeah, so along the way, and Matt can tell you about it, but we created a data science team that Matt leads and called Data Lab, and that's client facing as well. So that's our journey so far.
Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Matt Dunne. I'm the senior innovation and data science manager here at Katten, which is roles sort of changed over the years, where we added our capabilities. And these days, really spend my time doing two things. One is generative AI and all that entails, the evaluation, application, and et cetera. But like Andy said, I also had our Data Lab data science team, which we do some internal projects, but the somewhat unique thing about it is we actually help our lawyers on client-facing matters, where their Excel skills and their natural language processing skills at scale, sort of exceed what they taught in law school, and they call us in and we hack solutions together.
Do they teach any of that in law school?
From time to time, I research what they are teaching, and I don't know, I can be a bit of a diva about these things, but never to my satisfaction.
Yeah. Well, that's good stuff. So the way you guys are organized, we were going to talk a little bit about the organizational structure there at Katten, and that is a frequent topic on the podcast as well. Like I did a post on LinkedIn a couple of months ago on 10 years of innovation in legal, and I went back to the 2014 ILTA roster, and there were only 16 people with the word innovation in their title, and now there's over 300. And I've wondered aloud, all right, that's almost a 2,000% increase. Like, does that mean we were doing 2,000% as much innovation work? And the answer, of course, is no. But there does seem to be a bit more of a focus on that. And I think AI has really shook the tree a little bit, especially in it's gotten, when that Goldman report came out, about 44% of legal tasks being able to be automated via generative AI, XComs around the AmLaw took notice. And I think there's more of a genuine interest in innovating. There was a lot of innovation theater going on for a while as law firms wanted to appear innovative to their clients. But Andy, so how long has the innovation role the chief innovation officer role existed at Katten, and how do you guys differentiate yourself from KM?
Well, it's 6 or 7 years. It's probably creeping up on seven for me. And it's much different than, well, we don't have a very organized CAM, so it's different, but it's also adjacent. Like, I think everything most innovation people do, whether they like to say it or not, touches CAM. And frankly, in the world of AI, that is based on good CAM practices, right? Good data. So, we're all sort of beholden to it. But certainly we've sort of have a CAM separate from the innovation team. The idea behind this team is to be sort of small and agile and find a problem, find a solution, and hand it off, right? Does it happen in reality? Maybe not. Maybe we own a lot more than we planned on owning, at least still, because, one of the things that without maybe a more organized KM function, or, in some groups, maybe it goes into practice management. In some groups, maybe it goes into IT. It's not living anywhere yet, or maybe it just goes into the practices generally. So we're a little early in our stage of how to hand things off, but the idea is for solutions, not sort of ongoing work around the groups.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard the term KM Classic, kind of like Coke Classic, which is KM pre-innovation, which is what a lot of people think of when they think of KM, which is, forms libraries and, those sorts of things. Well, Matt, your role is not unique. It is becoming less unique by the day. Like, I'm seeing more and more people do what you do in legal, which is great, because honestly, even 5 years ago, I saw very little of it. So, do you roll into innovation, and it sounds like you're working with the practices directly. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, the lines on the Venn diagram are a little blurry and a little messy, to be sure. I consider my particular set of skills, if I can make a movie reference there, to be, not all that common, in that the core of what I do is used in knowledge management, but it's not knowledge management in itself. Classic KM, if you will. You could say the same thing for innovation, where people, process, and technology is a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason, because it's true. What I do is mostly focused on the technology part, which is kind of the impetus of the article. Less so on the people and process. And it's really not about innovation in the traditional sense. I mean, traditional is in like 5 years ago of just reworking how you do things. It really is heavily focused on the application of the underlying technology. So, I don't know how you draw that Venn diagram, but it'd be a small but mighty circle on there.
Yeah, I think that I moderated a panel at the AI KM Inside Practice conference. I guess it was in April or May, and we had some heavy hitters on there. We had Meredith Williams from Gibson Dunne, and Christy Bentz from NRF, and Peter Giovannis from McGuire Woods. And all three panelists talked through how they bucket activities, like what falls under KM, what falls under innovation, and every scenario was different. And I think that's pretty consistent, largely dictated. It seems like culture has a big influence on that. Is that how big an influence has the firm's culture had on the organizational design there at Katten?
I think quite a bit. I was thinking about this, and we all claim we're entrepreneurial, but we're also smaller and a flatter type of firm. So what happens is, I think that access and sort of, things are top down, but there's a lot of bottom up. And what happens is, they want to sort of see us touching a little bit of everything, and they want to see us working together with other groups like they do, meaning the partners, So it's definitely a different organization than these much larger firms that we are. So I think it's sort of the spirit of what we're doing in a smaller, agile group trying to spread the word is not that different than how the firm is run, which is sort of on a flatter basis. Still is a business, obviously, but definitely, more hands-on and sort of talking to and walking the halls and sort of telling the stories.
Yeah. And I think that's, KM, another observation I've had over the years of working and selling into the KM world is sometimes it becomes a catch-all. Like, it's KM becomes the conduit between tech and, the timekeepers essentially. And, things that don't fall under the traditional definition of KM ends up owning and managing. And go ahead, Andy. You want to say
And
something?
listen, I was just going to say the CAM, because we don't have maybe as organized a CAM group, like it falls to us. But I also think, based on, I'm lucky enough to have a history here that was on the operations side. So I have different contact points than others may have. I have different knowledge and different sort of capital, to play with the partners than others have. So, and that's why I started in my other role, started doing this, was to be that conduit for the technology, and it's just not sort of an IT rep, but actually a business rep to talk about how it could help the businesses, right? And it wasn't just on the knowledge base. Again, it's touching more and more knowledge management just because we need good data, but certainly that was sort of how we came to where we are.
Yeah. And, the foundation for AI projects, you got to have good data, especially, there's the hot topic of the day is like agentic AI. And, agentic AI is, you must have good data, right? The decision tree is being navigated by an automated mechanism based on the data inputs. So if those inputs are no good, that whole process falls apart. Matt, how much of what you do on the data side is really laying the foundation for the AI initiatives that you guys have underway and maybe are coming down the road?
None of it. I actually consider it completely separate. One of my what's the bet noirs is where people say, "Well, you got to have clean data," and that's true in traditional machine learning, but that's the very nature of why generative AI is so great, because the actual input. Now, let's stress that's the input, as opposed to the stuff that you're retraining it on or fine tuning it on, can actually be kind of messy. And I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where people are talking about using generative AI as if it's like a traditional database, and they say, "Oh, I've got to get everything structured and I got everything cleaned up," and I'll raise my hand and say, "Well, that's what the Gen AI is for, right?" And then they just look at me with a face like I, asked them the square root of a really large number because they don't know how to react. But on our data work, it's actually very little related to generative AI. It is stuff that you would, as a data science student, which I was at one point, you would learn about cleaning data. Very big, very important part of that. It's more an art than a science, because you're kind of iterating and finding out what the attorney needs and testing out theories. There, it's really quite important. Now, when it comes to the generative AI stuff, we don't do any of that because we don't have to. To make this stuff work, there's a lot of other techniques you can use, especially in agentic workflows, that are going to get you a heck of a lot closer to solving your problem than some nebulous thought of, okay, we got to clean up the data.
So it sounds like AI, your AI strategy, your AI initiatives are all rolling up under innovation. Is that accurate? Do you have a formal, organized, is that a box on the org chart, CKO, like Chief Knowledge Officer at Katten?
No,
Okay.
we don't have one. I mean, who knows as this develops, what's going to happen. But for now, we do not have that.
Gotcha. So
it turns to us, right? So
right.
between sort of Matt's capabilities plus our sort of in we will have to clean up some of the data, at least in terms of the document. Even just having the right documents to use with the Gen AI, right, is somewhat data cleaning, which everyone has to do some hygiene around that. So, but yeah, so it kind of falls to our group to lead that charge too.
And there's a component of it wasn't possible until this happened. Kind of a recurring theme in technology. So applying generative AI to deal documents, or frankly any documents, well, that's a really good way to pull out a lot of knowledge which needs to be managed. But until you do that, you don't necessarily have the raw material data as the oil for chief knowledge officer to come in and do their thing, especially if you want to run it as more like a mature rather than an entrepreneurial function. And those are very different things. I think Ben Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz talked about hiring a CEO and saying, like, no, I don't want somebody from the Fortune 500 for a startup because it's just a different game.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a different game. I've been an entrepreneur for 32 years and in several different industries. My wife and I actually own 5 gyms here in St. Louis as well. And I have seen, and I was president of the Franchisee Association. I had a real close look under the hood at how different backgrounds would perform in an entrepreneurial environment. And some of the lowest performing entrepreneurs were really good corporate operators. When you're an entrepreneur, you operate with very limited resources, right? So there's a franchisee who was a senior executive at a large corporation like Fortune 50, and he had a team, he had budget, and when you're operating on a shoestring and you got to wear a lot of different hats, there's a whole different set of decisions that have to be made, right? It's all trade-offs. It's not and, it's or. And additionally, there's a different risk component when you're an entrepreneur. It's like, you open a gym and you sign a 10-year lease with a personal guarantee and get an SBA loan and they put a lien on your house. That's a different level of stress that, hey, if your corporate job doesn't work out, you go find another one. So yeah, I have seen, I completely agree when you're, even as an intrapreneur, which, it sounds like you guys are operating in that fashion, you're taking risks. And I see that as a key differentiator too, between innovation and knowledge management, right? Like lawyers are trained to not take risk, right? It's risk mitigation. And in innovation, if you're not failing a non-trivial percentage of the time, you're not innovating. It requires failure. And I don't know Andy, how have you guys managed that? I imagine, highlighting how many failures you had last month is probably not the typical conversation. How do you?
And I'm not advertising that to the world on your podcast, but yes, we have had failures. And frankly, one of the biggest projects we had as we started failed. And it was a big investment of money. And, now there's, frankly, it laid the groundwork for a different solution for, frankly, a buy versus build solution. And, but lessons learned, right? And lessons learned about, myself included, learning about accuracy with using software, right? And that nothing's gonna be 100%. And I said, why is it gonna be 100%? And our attorney said, why is it only 90% accuracy if we're lucky? But, that's the chance we have to take. We don't, listen, we're not taking moonshots and spending millions of dollars and losing that, but we are taking chances, and it's reputational. So we are sort of chipping away sometimes at our own capital, right, internally to do these things.
Yeah.
Versus, and listen, it's not always like that, but I think on the knowledge side, it is a little bit different where you're collecting, this is sort of the lane we're in, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to use it, versus people like Matt who are, and I are going out there. Matt started this data science team, right? And we sort of have this thing now that we didn't know it was going to work, right? But now it resonates, and, whether you can have the internal clientele, but also the clients that are using it versus, third parties or whomever, it's kind of a cool thing. So, but it didn't start smoothly.
Right. Yeah. Failure is, in law school, I think, I don't have a JD. I have an MBA, and we were trained on a whole different set of curriculum and mindsets. And, in business, it's, we talk a lot about risk reward, and, there's, without taking some risk, there's limited upside. It's just the nature of things. So, well, Matt, in the article, it mentioned that you guys mentioned that the tech will take care of itself, right? And provide a little bit of context, expand on that if you could.
Well, it's just that when I've worked on these projects, for the most part, my refrain, it's not so much a refrain, but when people ask about, hey, can we do this? Usually the answer is yes, the tech can do that or can be made to do that. It's advanced enough for most cases. To the extent you have to modify it, it's a little bit of customization around the agentic workflows. It's not like we need a leap in the capability from OpenAI's latest model in order for the idea that they have in their head to work. So when things reach that record scratch moment, that bottleneck moment, it's usually the people and process part. Now, that's not meant as a criticism. It's just really more of an observation. And the more I see of these, the more I understand it. But I don't know, like I didn't promise there wouldn't be any math, but I'll give you some math. So the a lot of people think of it as people process technology. If you add those up, it's 3 + 3 = 9. Okay, well, what if you turn one of them into 0? Well, at least you still have 6. But it's not really additive. It's actually multiplicative. So 3 times 3 times 0 is still 0. And if that 0 is not the tech, but the people for whatever reason, well, the result is you're basically not going anywhere. And that's just sort of an outgrowth of observation from having worked on projects in the past.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And the last time we chatted, we talked about where the initial focus should be with respect to an AI strategy, and we talked about like workflows with a positive ROI, and how I've been an advocate of, for firms starting out and getting their feet wet, business of law use cases, just lower risk, that you don't have to worry about client data getting exposed. It's an easy way. Lawyers have a very low threshold for missteps, and so as you're rolling things out, and I'd much rather stub my toe working with the finance team than with the practice and attorneys that are billing $1,500 an hour. But like, Andy, how do you guys evaluate like where the ROI is the highest? Like, what does that process look like?
That's hard, right? I mean, it's really hard, and I think I still haven't skinned the cat. I think where we choose to invest is, to the extent they have the time, is in the busiest groups, right? Because we want to sort of help them move their practices forward, whether it's, by being able to take in more transactions, or frankly, the thing that I think we have resonates the most is associate happiness. And then, listen, they're happy is a broad term, but I would just say eliminating the hassles, right? Making it easier for drafts, making it easier for the non-billable stuff, things that sort of they don't want to do when they're already busy enough, right? So the ROI is, you can't measure happiness, you can measure turnover, but there are many factors involved in that, right? But I think that's sort of where we push it for. I think we're just getting to the point where we can start looking at, time saved when doing certain activities. And frankly, we all could probably do a better job by going and doing sort of old projects again to see what they would look like using software. But they're not going to take the time, and I don't blame them. It gets back to that: don't waste their time on non-billable things. So I think we're getting to that point, but it's still really hard, and I have not skinned that cat very well, and that's where we end up. People in my role start using their capital to be like, trust me, this is something. We're going to invest something, and it's coming, but we don't have that yet. That's the hardest thing. I've been asked this question for the last 6 years since we started, right? And I still don't have a very good answer. I know people who, it frustrates Matt that we don't have a better way of doing this, who's, a data guy, but it's just, this is the world we live in.
Yeah. Well, it's, you're not alone. I talk to a lot of people. I mean, over the last 16 years, we've done business with about 110 AM law firms. So I've had a really good cross-sectional view of what takes place in big law and how people are evaluating questions like this. And it's a lot of, feeling it out. And I mean, even with us, InfoDash is a intranet, extranet platform, especially on the intranet side. Like, how do you measure ROI around that? Like, okay, we're building culture, right? In this remote work era, intranets became a lot more important. Not everybody's in the office. Displaying firm news and new hires and work anniversaries and birthdays and CLEs and all those sorts of things became more important when everybody went hybrid. But put it in a spreadsheet. Like, I mean, maybe you could look at retention, kind of like what you said. It's like, okay, we have a more informed workforce who we have a less transactional relationship with. But if you're asking me to compare that against your Windows 11 upgrade, it's like that's not even apples and oranges. It's fruit salad. Right. Matt, as a data guy, like how do you think about ROI with some of this stuff?
Yeah. Okay. So one of the first things they teach you in data science school is people actually aren't convinced by data. They're convinced by stories. Kind of explains a lot, right? So to the extent that we can get some empirical basis for saying something like time saved, that's kind of a possibility, but that's more anecdata rather than data. I mean, we've looked at time entries and, again, I'm not criticizing lawyers because whenever I have to enter a time entry, I do the minimum amount of work necessary in order to do it. So, they don't really match up with what you would need to do a legit analysis of time saved. And it just sort of is what it is. So, I used to think there was some version of, you can call this Dunne's law, where he'd say, all right, you've heard of if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Well, I used to think, well, if you can't measure it, you can't justify it in terms of spending on generative AI. But I'm not sure that's true anymore because, like I said, people don't really necessarily do this because you can point to somewhere on the balance sheet saying, see, our ROI was this particular multiple. It's not really how it works. If you get a passionate, even minority of relevant and important people within the group, I think that's really what matters, at least at this stage. I'm sure the cost of these things will go up and people will start looking at them in the future. But that's, I don't know, maybe that's a 2026 problem.
Well, the fact that I'm here with a company is testament that you don't have to articulate ROI for it to work, right? Because every AM law firm, I know of one AM law firm that doesn't have an intranet. Yep. And they're in insurance defense, kind of low margin practice, and they're on the smaller side of the AM law list. And they're the only one. There may be others, but that's the only one that I know of. So you can absolutely, people just know that they need to do it. But speaking of numbers, I don't know if you guys saw it's not just the ILTA survey. The numbers that are coming out look totally aspirational to me. A bunch of baloney, frankly. Like 74% of law firms, 700 or more attorneys said they're using AI in business workflows. There's no way. Like did somebody Google Chat GPT? And yeah, if that's your AI usage, great. I know there's a lot of experimentation going on. Another number I saw in Jeff Brandt's Pinhawk, it was just today, I think I saw, or maybe yesterday, a new Copilot study came out and said that they did, was it Bain? No, it was Forrester, did a study on Copilot productivity, and it increased operational productivity like 358%. Like, okay, I want to see some numbers. And he called it out. I love Jeff. He shoots straight. He called it out as this is very optimistic. I don't know, Andy, what is your take on the all the numbers flying around?
Listen, it depends how you ask the question. Certainly on the law
Yeah.
firms using it, because I have a feeling that people are using it sort of not for the legal practice, but to get started on something, right? Sort of that prompting. So maybe that's what they're talking about. But yeah, in terms of the practices and the work, there's no way that's even close to being the reality, right? So, but maybe I just don't know the right people. And on the Copilot, that's a whole separate issue, because that's, and for law firms particularly, I think the Copilot uptake's been pretty slow because I mean it's complicated. All the different sort of responsibilities we have. So, but it's happening. People are using this stuff. They're testing this stuff, but whether they're using it for work, I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, the question could have been asked better, for sure. But and what I thought was interesting is at the low end. So I think it was attorneys 50 and under. Only 20% said yes, that they were using AI in business processes. I forget exactly the wording. Which
well, the only thing I could think of for those groups is like they're nervous about, like, if you take the really young people, they're probably nervous about, they don't even know the right answer to begin with. So I think they're afraid of relying on something else. I don't mean, you know what I'm saying? They're still new and they don't have the experience to know where the BS is. So it wouldn't surprise me there. Plus, I mean, one of the, in the innovation space generally, what we've had is like, young associates are interested, but they're really worried about making those partners happy as they get started. So they don't want to sort of bother with other stuff or be distracted or frankly do something that the partners may not necessarily believe in, right? So there's a lot going on there in terms of their sort of influences and how they get into it. So again, it's how you ask the question is who you ask the question to. One of the challenges with innovation space general, and I think it's going to be this way for Gen AI, is like different people at different arcs of their career are going to have different sort of motivations to do things, right? So there's all sorts of levels of partners up and down, the experience with business, with service, and that, and then you have associates at different levels, sort of where they're going. So there's so many different people we have to teach, and we have to understand what their motivations are. That it's hard, and that question all those questions about usage can get sort of, made more, opaque by that very issue.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a partner 3 years from retirement, how much time are you really going to be motivated to invest to learn this emerging technology? I don't know. Like, I would think less than somebody who's early in their career, where this is going to be a fundamental part of how things play out. That's reading tea leaves there. I heard an interesting podcast this morning talking about an AI winter. This is coming from a general partner of a VC fund. The guy was, I think he was the chief revenue officer at HubSpot, and really well-informed guy. And he's totally bullish on AI, but he made some really good points that, the players who come out of the gate hot aren't usually the winners in the long run. Right, the Lotus 1-2-3s of the world, or the Harvard Graphics or the Word Perfects. There's a million, the Netscape Navigators. In fact, he uses that one. He uses that example specifically, but he talks about a potential AI winter, where as we hit the kind of the bottom of the trough of disillusionment on the Gartner hype curve, and people kind of throw up their hands and get frustrated. And then investment starts to reel itself in a little bit, because, the pendulum may swing in the other direction, where if we have some big AI investments that go bust, people are going to get real nervous writing checks, which is going to affect, so I think there's a real possibility of that happening. In fact, I think it's kind of likely. I don't know. Andy, do you have any thoughts on the
I'm
pendulum?
not smart enough to think about that kind of stuff. No, but I will say there's so many products. There are, obviously there's a lot of money to be sort of that's being put into our marketplace. And I don't know. And we listen. One of the things I was saying in the previous question was, clients are interested, but they're not demanding it yet, right? They're not sure if they trust it. In fact, some are saying don't use it or don't even use AI, which is a whole separate issue. Just bad way to ask a question. But so yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all. But this has been going on for 2 years now, so I don't know when the winter will come. And I think if I can just think out loud, I do think like now that, some firms are like jumping out and getting into everything, right? And most firms are, I think, like us and sort of, okay, we're going to take measured steps. I think now in the next 1 or 2 or 3 years, as we start to take those steps, then it'll start falling out to say, okay, this is sort of maybe some winners or losers, or, what use cases we'll track.
Yeah, it's rarely a straight line, right? Like with technology where everything just goes smoothly and up and to the right. That's unusual. Well, let's talk a little bit about build versus buy. Matt, you and I talked about this, and I have some, having seen some of the challenges that law firms have on the build side. Like we would sometimes build custom solutions and hand them off to KM, and IT would come to the table late and struggle to manage it, right? Because there's new JavaScript libraries or tech stacks that they're not, well versed in, or pieces of infrastructure that is outside of their area of expertise. Like, when do you feel like build versus buy? Like, how should firms be navigating that decision?
Okay, so one of the bad things about innovation people is they like to deal with like big ideas, and they don't necessarily like to do the day-to-day work of like once the problem is more or less solved. So there's a difference between putting together a tool, building it, so to speak, where you get it to the proof of concept stage versus, okay, you're actually going to have a lot of users and have it in production. And that's a rather large chasm to cross. That being said, I work at a law firm after all. I'd say, well, what do you mean by buy, and what do you mean by build? Because we get contacted more and more by companies whose business model is essentially, hey, you've got an idea for a product you want to build, an agent. You're not going to do that as a law firm. Outsource it to us. You basically just give us your idea of what you're trying to do, and we'll help you do it. Classic business model. Is that building, or is that buying, or is that build dying, or something like that? I don't know. We may need a new word for it. I started out sort of thinking, really, for law firms, it's almost always buy versus build. But then, like other things, I kind of, talk to a few people and find the exceptions. Some of the larger firms where, they deal with hundreds to thousands of basically the same document over a period of time. Okay, then it might make sense to even hire people full time to build something for that, because you see it there, and even with the cost of the support stuff factored in, you can discern and say, okay, I see it used this many times, and I'm doing the math, and it adds up. It's worth it. Now, I think that's relatively rare for most law firms, but it does exist.
Yeah, I don't see it happening. I don't see that scenario often. Like how I would advise a firm is, if there's a competitive advantage on the table, like then think about allocating the engineering resources to go tackle the problem. But if there's something off the shelf and you're trying to save money by building, you're probably very likely going to come out on the losing end of that, because like support and maintenance always gets underestimated in TCO calculations. And the thing about support and maintenance is they never go away. Your initial development costs are discrete. Your initial development has a beginning and an end. Support and maintenance goes on for the life of the platform. So, that usually gets overlooked, and they just look at, hey, it's going to stand up one agile team and for, 18 months, and there's our costs. No, that's just the beginning of your costs. So, yeah, I mean, the firms being good at engineering, architecture, product management, support, QA, documentation, like how many firms, even the big ones, A, are capable of doing all those things really well, and B, want to allocate resources, those kind of resources, for something they can buy off the shelf. I don't know, Andy, what are your thoughts?
I agree with that. I mean, from my history from my other role, like when most firms don't do that with an accounting system, with a conflict system, all sorts of things that's not what we're in the business of doing. We're in the business of legal services. Let's get it to the people and as efficiently as possible, and all the other stuff will take care of itself. Now, this is a little bit different because it's actually going to, lend itself to how we provide services, I suppose. But still, it's just, I don't think it's worth the investment. Like you said, there's just so much ongoing stuff that has to happen. And we're not going to be able to compete with most technology companies or, any of us, right? Maybe a few of the firms that you can overpay a little bit, but that's sort of you're on a razor's edge there in terms of, having the people to take care of your product. And that's not something that I think we should be involved in, or most firms should be involved. So that's where I get Matt, and Matt has a fair point. If you can partner and sort of co-develop, I think that's a different thing where you have someone standing behind it. But just doing the pure builds, I think, are scary.
Yeah, and I think another thing is that people think, well, there's no secret sauce, and people are trying to find that secret sauce by virtue of creating what they see as a new piece of tech. But remember, I went back to 3 times 3 times 3 equals 9. It's the interaction of the technology plus the people and process part that leads to the ultimate outcome. And just because somebody can buy or think up and construct a novel piece of tech doesn't mean they can use it properly. Doesn't mean they can recreate workflows around that to offer a useful business proposition to clients, just because they have the tech. So if you're a law firm, I would say, focus your secret sauce efforts on the people and process part rather than the technology part.
Yeah, I guess those were a couple things to add to the list: is training, change management. Like those are more things that you have to be good at. Like, with us as a product company, I guess I have very strong opinions on this because we did custom dev for so long, and when we transitioned to a product company, I saw such a difference in the outcomes because, like, we provide the training and we provide the support, and we didn't when we were custom dev. Like, yeah, you could call us up, you could buy a retainer of hours, and I'd have the bandwidth carved out to answer the call and provide the engineering resources. But yeah, I've seen such a difference in outcomes, and law firms have a hard time. Look, if you're a tech all-star, and this may be an unpopular opinion, but it's true, is like law firms are not the place where these tech all-stars want to go and work, and there's plenty of like incredible talent in tech and legal, but they didn't gravitate there because they wanted to work at a law firm, right? Usually it's a series of, like me, I kind of fell into it and liked the problem domain, and I just kind of got hooked. But, there's the main reason is because these tech all-stars want to work with the latest and greatest. Like, AM law firms just moved to the cloud in the last 2 years. Our stuff won't even run on-prem. So I don't know, Andy, what, like, how you guys, what are your thoughts?
I think we would all say we have really good people working for us. I also think that they, you know, they're realistic about what they want to take on their own, right? Because, you know, the best person is going to want to have a lot of people around them, peers, to help them develop things. And that's just not how we're built. We're not built for you to have, you know, 50. I mean, maybe the bigger firms are. Don't know how big their IT teams are, but like a firm like ours, which is, you know, mid-size, I think it's, you know, you need sort of other people alongside you to do this stuff and be happy doing it as well, right? So I think it's a number of things that get involved, but, you know, whether it's, again, it's just not the environment that sort of is comfortable for that to happen, right? Yeah, one or two people could take it on, but there's not sort of that give or take about it at a law firm. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like it is as a in a technical role, having a strong peer network to brainstorm with and float ideas off of and commiserate and experiment with and experience share and all that stuff it's really important. And if you don't have that, you're at a disadvantage. But this has been a great conversation. Like the time absolutely flew by, which is always a good sign that it was a good conversation. Well, Andy, I saw you at KM&I. Are you you got any other conferences planned for the rest of the year or into the spring?
I'll be at the Legal Tech Fund, so, you know,
okay,
like a lot of people, which is one of the better, I think, environments, just because you get to see the new stuff, and then it's not all brand new, but it's certainly a different group. It's spread out with so many good vendors, and so I find it really interesting and refreshing to be there with sort of the startup mentality.
Yeah.
So that's where I'll be. How about you?
Well, yeah, we'll be there as well. We're actually pitching.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah, we're a recent addition to the TLTF portfolio, and love the concept. I think they're doing really good things in the space. You know, they're the only legal tech focused venture fund out there. And, you know, they have the ability to not just write checks, but make introductions, advise on a next level, like what's working, what's not.
Yeah. And perfect timing, right? With all the money gone in the last couple of years, I think they've done a really nice job with it. So
they have.
I think they attract a lot of good people. So it's a fun couple days.
Yeah. What about you, Matt? Are you going to be making the trip to Miami?
No, I am in all likelihood going to be presenting at the Inside Practice conference they have in Chicago in March of next year. I was going to do their one in New York, but we're gonna send somebody else. So I don't know if your listeners have any ideas of what they want us to talk about in Chicago in March. I think it's around the people part. I think maybe they read this article too. So give us a shout.
Yeah, we'll be at that one as well. We do a lot of conferences. Well, good stuff. I really appreciate you guys spending a little bit of time with me. And Andy, I look forward to seeing you in December. And Matt, we'll see you in the spring in Chicago.
Great.
Thanks, Ted.
All right. You guys have a good one.
Be well.
All right. Take care. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by InfoDash.